She arrived on a Monday morning, the kind of morning when the sky still looked sleepy and the school grounds were only starting to fill with the usual noise of footsteps and chatter. No one paid much attention when she stepped through the gate. She moved softly, like someone trying not to be seen, and carried a bag that looked slightly too big for her small shoulders. She didn't walk slowly or quickly, just at a simple, steady pace, as if she was used to blending in. Inside the classroom, the teacher introduced her to everyone. She stood there politely, giving a small smile, but it was the kind of smile that didn't invite questions or attention. It just said she was present, nothing more. The class gave the usual mixed response. A few nods, a couple of curious glances, and many students who simply went back to whatever they were doing. Nothing about her made people stop and look twice. She chose a seat near the window, not too far back but not in front either. It was the kind of seat a student picks when they want to be part of the class but stay unnoticed at the same time. Throughout the morning, she listened carefully and wrote notes in neat lines. She didn't raise her hand, didn't whisper to anyone, and didn't show any sign of wanting the spotlight. She was just calm. During break time, students formed their usual small groups. Some rushed outside to play, some stayed back to talk loudly about weekend stories, and some gathered around their favorite spots. She stayed in her seat for a moment, then quietly stepped outside and found a bench away from the big groups. She took out a small lunch and ate slowly, looking around with soft curiosity, as if she was trying to understand the new place without drawing attention. A few students glanced at her, wondering if she wanted company, but something about her peaceful, quiet energy made them unsure. She didn't look lonely, just self-contained, like someone who had learned to enjoy her own space. The teachers noticed her politeness. When they asked a question, she nodded politely or answered in a steady, gentle voice. She didn't seem overly excited about anything, but she also didn't look unhappy. She simply existed in a calm middle ground, which made her easy to overlook. Not for a bad reason, just because she didn't demand attention. But sometimes, the most unnoticed students carry the biggest stories. The first moment the teachers saw a hint of something different was during the weekly music period. The class entered the music room, all buzzing with different levels of interest. Some loved music, some tolerated it, and some used the time to whisper and giggle with friends. She walked in quietly and looked around with the same soft eyes she had since morning. The piano stood in the corner of the room. Most students saw it as a large, heavy instrument meant for special performances or for those who already knew how to play. She glanced at it for a moment, but quickly looked away, not wanting anyone to notice her interest. When the music teacher asked everyone to sit, she sat at the very back. Not because she wasn't interested, but because she didn't want to draw any unnecessary attention. The teacher played a simple tune for the class and explained the basics of rhythm and melody. While most students tapped their feet or whispered excitedly, she listened with deep focus, the kind of focus a person has when they already understand more than they're letting on. The teacher asked for a few volunteers to try single notes on the piano, just to introduce them to the sound and feel of the keys. A few students rushed forward, pressing the keys loudly and laughing when they created offbeat sounds. The teacher smiled patiently and encouraged them, but after a while, the teacher turned to the rest of the class and asked if anyone else wanted to try. She kept her head down. She didn't want to show anything. She didn't want a room full of eyes on her hands. So she shook her head slightly when the teacher's gaze passed her way. No one thought much about it. To them, she was just another shy student who probably had no experience with instruments. The rest of the day went normally. She walked to her next classes, stayed polite and kept to herself. No drama. No noise, no stories worth passing around. She was the kind of student teachers described as quiet and disciplined. Rarely a problem, rarely a highlight. But sometimes being quiet doesn't mean having nothing to offer. Sometimes it means holding back something important until the right moment comes. By the end of the week, the school announced the upcoming talent day. Every year, students were encouraged to sign up for something. Singing, dancing, skits, poetry, instruments, anything. Most students enjoyed the idea of showcasing something fun, even if they weren't exceptional at it. It was just part of the school's traditions. When the sign-up sheets were placed on the notice board, Students rushed to claim spots. Some joked about trying something silly. Others argued about which performance would get the loudest applause. The hallway filled with excitement. She walked up to the board slowly. Students stepped aside casually, still caught up in their own conversations. She scanned the list quietly, her eyes moving from one category to another. She lingered for a moment at the music section. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if they wanted to reach forward. Then, after a small breath, she picked up the pen. A few students standing nearby watched curiously. No one expected her name to appear on the list. They whispered to each other, trying to guess what she might choose. Maybe storytelling? Maybe reading? Something calm and simple, they thought. But she wrote her name next to piano performance. Someone standing behind her blinked in surprise. She plays piano? Another student whispered, but she didn't turn around. She placed the pen back, stepped away from the board, and walked down the hallway with the same calm steps she always had. A few minutes later, one of the teachers checked the lists. When the teacher saw her name under the piano section, a small amused grin formed. It wasn't meant to be unkind, it was simply surprise. The teacher assumed she must have signed up for something too difficult, maybe without understanding how challenging it could be. After all, she had never shown any sign of knowing how to play. But every person holds parts of themselves that others cannot see at first. As the days moved forward, she continued to live quietly in the background of school life. But something in her routine changed. She began reaching school a little earlier than usual. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for her to slip into the empty music room when the halls were still quiet. She never touched the piano during class, but in those quiet early moments, she let herself sit on the stool, adjust the height, and place her hands gently on the keys. She didn't play then, not yet. She simply sat, breathing slowly, preparing herself. She knew Talent Day would be her first chance to show what she had been hiding for so long. And she also knew that no one expected anything from her. Maybe that was her greatest advantage. A quiet girl unnoticed by many. A quiet girl with a skill she kept tucked away like a secret. A quiet girl standing on the edge of surprising an entire school. And all it would take was one note to change everything. The news of the upcoming Talent Day spread quickly through the school, and soon everyone was talking about who had signed up for what. Some students planned exciting group performances, while others prepared funny skits or energetic dances. The hallways filled with a warm buzz of excitement. But in the middle of all the noise, she continued moving quietly, almost untouched by the growing chatter around her. Still, one detail kept slipping into different conversations around the school. Her name under the piano category. Many students had never even heard her speak more than a sentence. So the idea of her playing an instrument, especially one as challenging as the piano, felt unexpected. Some wondered if she signed up by mistake. Others thought maybe she just wanted to try something new, even if she had no experience. A few found it amusing and joked lightly about how the performance might go. Nothing cruel, just normal school whispers filled with assumptions. The teachers noticed too. When the music teacher saw her name on the list again later that day, a small smile formed. It wasn't a bad smile, just one filled with simple expectations. After all, from what the teacher had seen in class, she looked like a beginner. Quiet, gentle, and always sitting in the back. She didn't show any sign of having musical knowledge. During the week leading up to Talent Day, the teachers began preparing the students. They encouraged everyone to practice, rehearse, and polish their performances. The music room became a busy place after school hours, with students playing different instruments, singing, or practicing coordinated steps for their acts. She didn't join them, not because she didn't want to practice, but because she preferred to be unseen. She continued coming early in the mornings, slipping into the music room when no one else was around. She would sit in front of the piano, place her hands softly on the keys, and breathe in slowly. There was something calming about those early moments. The room silent, the hallways empty, the soft morning light coming through the windows. But she still didn't play. Not yet. She only touched the keys gently, letting her fingers rest on them, remembering the feeling of piano practice at home. Her hands moved lightly from key to key, tracing the shapes of notes she'd memorized long ago. She practiced silently, going over the piece in her mind. But when she heard footsteps in the hallway, she quickly stood up and stepped away, not wanting anyone to see her there. Her classmates found her behavior even more mysterious. One girl who often helped in the music room told others that she never saw the quiet girl practice. Another student claimed she must have forgotten about signing up. A few leaned against the notice board during break time and stared at the list again, wondering out loud if she would back out before the event. Even the teachers exchanged small, harmless grins when the topic came up. It wasn't meant to be rude, just amusement at the idea of someone so quiet choosing such a bold performance. Some thought she might play a very simple tune or maybe just a few notes. They imagined she might freeze on stage or get nervous easily, given how reserved she seemed. The only person who knew the truth was her. At home, she practiced every evening. Not loudly, not dramatically, just with the same quiet focus she carried everywhere. Her fingers danced across the keys with surprising confidence. She knew her chosen piece well, each note placed in her memory like small stars. Music had always been her hidden safe space. She grew up listening to songs that filled the house with warmth. Over time, she learned how to turn that warmth into sound on the piano. But she never told her classmates about this part of her life. She never mentioned the years of practice or the tiny performances she gave in front of family members. She kept it inside as something precious. Something that didn't need to be displayed casually. Still, choosing to share that part of herself on Talent Day was a big decision. She didn't want attention, but she felt something pull her forward. A need to step into a moment that might change how others saw her. In the days leading up to the event, she continued her quiet routine. During class, she listened carefully, wrote neatly in her notebook, and never caused trouble. But she seemed slightly different. A small spark appeared behind her calm eyes, like she carried a secret she was preparing to reveal. One afternoon, while the class was discussing their acts, a few students turned towards her. "So, what are you doing for Talent Day?" one asked in a friendly, curious tone. She looked up slowly, as if she needed a moment to register the question. Then she answered simply, "Piano." The students exchanged surprised looks. "Oh, that's interesting," one of them said. Another added, "Did you just start learning?" She paused. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to explain too much. So she just said softly, "I've practiced before." The answer didn't satisfy their curiosity, but she didn't offer more. The conversation drifted away, but their curiosity grew. After class that day, when the students were walking out, a group of them passed the music room and peeked inside. They saw her near the piano, but she wasn't playing. She was adjusting the bench height and looking at the instrument quietly. "She never practices," one whispered. "Maybe she'll just press a few keys," another guessed. "Maybe she's shy," a third added. But none of them understood her pattern. Her silence wasn't a lack of ability. It was a way to protect something special until she was ready. The music teacher, too, noticed how she always slipped into the music room at odd hours. One morning, the teacher arrived a bit earlier than usual and saw her sitting in front of the piano, hands resting gently on the keys. There was something careful and thoughtful about the way she touched the instrument. The teacher didn't interrupt. The moment was too delicate. Instead, the teacher stepped away quietly, deciding not to disturb her. But even then, the teacher assumed she was only exploring the piano. The idea that she might be truly skilled didn't cross the teacher's mind. As the week went on, the school atmosphere grew more excited. Posters about Talent Day hung on the walls, rehearsals echoed through the halls, and teachers reminded students to finalize their preparations. She continued arriving early, practicing at home, and staying steady and calm at school. She didn't talk about her performance, didn't boast, and didn't worry about what others expected. She just focused on the music waiting inside her fingertips. By Thursday, the whispers grew more lively. Some students joked lightly about what might happen. Others wondered if she would withdraw at the last minute. Even the teachers shared soft conversations about the upcoming performances. "She's playing piano?" one teacher asked. "Yes," another replied with a small laugh. It's sweet. She's brave to try. A few teachers nodded, expecting a simple, cute performance. Nothing more. But she walked past those conversations without reacting. She wasn't offended. She understood why they thought that way. She had never shown anything that hinted at her real talent. Sometimes people expect only what they can see. As talent day approached, she began to feel a small flutter in her chest. Not fear, more like anticipation. She knew that playing in front of an entire school would be different from practicing alone at home. But she also knew this might be her chance to step out of the background for a moment. The night before the performance, she sat in front of her piano at home and played through her piece slowly. Every note felt familiar and comforting. She took her time, breathing steadily, letting her hands travel across the keys with memory-guided ease. When she finished, she sat quietly for a moment. She thought about the school, the stage, the teacher's small grins, the classmates' whispers, and the way people looked at her without really seeing her. Tomorrow, all of that would change. She didn't want fame or praise or applause. She just wanted to share something real. Something that showed a part of her no one knew existed. She closed the piano lid gently, stood up, and prepared for the next day with calm determination. At school the next morning, the buzz was louder than usual. Students carried costumes, props, and instruments. Teachers moved around, organizing schedules and checking lists. She walked through the excitement quietly, as she always did. But deep inside she was ready. Talent Day was finally here. And soon, everyone would discover that the quiet girl they barely noticed had a story waiting in her hands. A story written in music. The morning of Talent Day arrived with a quiet kind of excitement that spread through the school like a warm breeze. Students lined up in the hallways, carrying costumes, instruments, and props. Teachers moved around with clipboards, checking details and guiding groups to their designated areas. Laughter and nervous chatter filled the air. It was the type of morning when everyone felt a little more awake than usual, fueled by the energy of the event. She walked into the building calmly, carrying nothing but her usual bag. She didn't need much. Her performance didn't require costumes or props. All she needed was a piano and the courage to sit in front of everyone. Around her, groups of students practiced their lines, repeated dance steps, or tuned instruments. A few were rehearsing in corners, whispering to themselves with last-minute jitters. Some were excited, some nervous, and some simply enjoying the day. She didn't join any of the busy circles. Instead, she found a quiet spot beside the wall and waited for the event to begin. Her eyes drifted to the stage, where the sound crew tested microphones and arranged chairs. The sun peeked in through the large windows, throwing soft light across the polished floor. As she waited, a group of students walked past her, chatting loudly. "Did you see the list? She's still doing the piano thing," one of them said. "Really? She never practiced in front of anyone," another replied. "I think she'll just play something super basic," someone else added with a soft laugh. They didn't say it to be mean, they just couldn't imagine anything else. To them, she was the quiet one who rarely spoke. In their minds, quiet meant inexperienced. Quiet meant shy. Quiet meant simple. But quiet can also mean focused. She didn't react to their words. She simply watched the stage, her fingers gently tapping the side of her leg in a rhythm only she understood. It was her way of keeping her nerves steady. Finally, the bell rang, signaling that the event was about to begin. Teachers guided classes into the auditorium, and everyone took their seats. The room buzzed with excitement as students whispered to each other and scanned the program sheets. She sat near the back with her class, listening to the rustle of papers and soft chatter. The auditorium felt huge compared to the small practice space at home. The piano sat at the center of the stage, gleaming under the bright lights. It looked both welcoming and intimidating. The principal gave a short speech, encouraging everyone to support their classmates and enjoy the day. Then the performances began. One by one, different acts took the stage. There were dancers in bright outfits, a group performing a funny skit, a singer who got loud applause, and a poetry reading that made the crowd go quiet. The students clapped supportively, cheering for their friends. She watched each performance with genuine interest. She wasn't jealous or nervous about others being talented. She simply enjoyed seeing everyone try their best. But with each performance, her turn moved closer. Her heart beat a little faster, but not in fear. It was more like a drum rolling before a big reveal. Finally, the announcer called her name. A hush fell over her class. A few students turned to look at her with raised eyebrows. Some looked curious, others confused. But all of them were surprised. She stood up slowly, smoothing her clothes with her hands and taking a steady breath. She walked toward the stage with calm steps, her head held neither too high nor too low, just steady. As she climbed the small steps to the platform, some teachers exchanged small, amused smiles. Again, not unkind, just filled with simple expectations. They assumed she would play something basic, maybe a short melody. She walked toward the piano, each step echoing softly in the quiet room. The lights felt warm on her face, and the auditorium looked even larger from this height. She reached the piano and paused for a moment. She placed her hand on the smooth surface of the instrument, feeling its familiar coldness. She pulled out the bench slightly, adjusted it with careful movements, and sat down. The room grew still. Students leaned forward. Teachers straightened slightly in their seats, curious. She placed her feet on the pedals gently, then rested her hands on her lap for a breath. For a moment, everything stood still as she looked at the keys, white and black, waiting for her. With a slow exhale, she lifted her hands and placed them lightly on the keyboard. The entire auditorium watched. She pressed the first note. It was soft yet powerful, rich in tone, filled with emotion in a way that instantly changed the air in the room. The sound floated across the hall with a surprising clarity, and the room reacted almost instantly. Teachers who had been smiling politely now leaned forward. Their expressions shifted from amusement to surprise. They didn't expect a note that confident, that controlled. She continued, moving her fingers with smooth precision. The melody grew stronger, fuller, and more expressive. Her hands glided from one end of the keyboard to the other, showing technique that could only come from years of quiet practice. Some students exchanged stunned looks. Others forgot to blink. The gentle rhythm of her playing wrapped the entire auditorium in a peaceful, almost magical feeling. Every note she played carried emotion, warm memories, quiet dreams, and stories she had never spoken aloud. Her face stayed calm, almost serene. She wasn't thinking about the crowd or the whispers or the expectations. She was thinking about the music, the way it moved through her, the way it felt to finally share it. Her fingers danced across the keys, creating a sound that didn't match the quiet image everyone had of her. Each note landed with purpose, and each transition flowed effortlessly. She played not like a beginner but like someone who had lived with music for a very long time. As she moved into the deeper part of the piece, the melody filled the room with a kind of emotional weight that made people sit up straight. It was the kind of music that made people feel something soft and real. Even the youngest students, who usually whispered or giggled during performances, stayed silent. The auditorium had never been this quiet. Those who underestimated her now sat frozen, surprised and deeply impressed. The teachers who grinned earlier found themselves speechless. One of them slowly lowered a cup of coffee, forgetting to take a sip. Another leaned closer, eyes widening in disbelief. The music teacher, sitting near the front, stared at the stage with growing amazement. She didn't rush through the piece. Every movement was controlled, thoughtful, and filled with emotion. She played as if she was telling a story through sound, a story she couldn't tell with words. When she reached the final section of the piece, the melody softened into something gentle and hopeful. Her hands slowed slightly, letting each note linger before moving to the next. It felt like she was giving the room a moment to breathe. And then, with one final, graceful motion, she played the last chord. The sound hung in the air, warm and delicate. For a moment, no one moved. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of awe. She lifted her hands from the keys slowly, letting the quiet settle. She didn't look at the crowd right away. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, as if savoring the peace that came after giving everything she had. Then she stood up calmly and stepped back from the piano. That was when the entire auditorium erupted. Students rose from their seats. Teachers clapped loudly. The applause echoed through the walls like a wave. And there she stood, someone they never noticed before, now at the center of the school's attention. But she didn't smile loudly or soak in the praise. She just gave a small, humble nod and walked off the stage quietly. Her classmates stared at her in shock as she returned to her seat. She sat down calmly, her expression gentle and unchanged. But everyone around her saw her differently now. The quiet girl they thought they knew was not the quiet girl who played on stage. And this was only the beginning of how she would change their understanding of her. It was strange how the room felt different that morning. The air inside the small house seemed lighter, as if something had quietly shifted overnight. She woke up with that feeling you get when you know life is about to move in a new direction, even if you don't know exactly how. She sat on the edge of her bed for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the soft light sneaking in through the curtains. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes you want to sit with it a little longer before the world starts calling again. She stretched, rubbed her hands together for warmth, and then stood. The wooden floor felt cool under her feet as she walked toward the little table where her old notebook still lay open from the night before. She had been writing down her thoughts again, something she didn't always do, but recently it had become a habit she found comfort in. She flipped through the pages, noticing how much had changed in them over time. Her handwriting looked more confident now, less unsure. It made her smile for a moment. As she made her way to the kitchen, she could hear the faint sound of birds outside, perched somewhere on the wires above the street. The world outside felt calm, like everything was waiting for her to make a choice, to take a step, to say something that would matter. She poured herself a cup of warm tea and leaned against the counter, letting the steam rise into her face. It felt grounding, like a small reminder that the day was hers to shape. She thought again about the music room at school, the way the teachers had watched her with doubtful eyes, the way their expressions had changed the moment she touched the piano keys. That memory had stayed with her, not because of pride but because it reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. She had something worth holding on to, something worth growing, even if the world didn't see it yet. After finishing her tea, she stepped outside for a short walk. The streets were quiet except for a few shopkeepers opening their shutters. The smell of fresh bread drifted from a nearby bakery, mixing with the cool morning air. She walked slowly, not in a hurry to get anywhere, just letting her feet guide her. Sometimes she liked doing that, walking without a clear destination because it helped her think better. As she reached the small park near her home, she noticed a group of children playing near the swings. One of the younger kids was holding a toy drum and tapping it with a level of seriousness that made her laugh a little. She watched them for a moment, remembering how different life felt at that age, when everything was simple and the hardest choice was deciding which game to play next. She sat on a bench under a tall tree, the leaves rustling gently above her. She took a deep breath and let her thoughts settle. She hadn't told anyone what happened in the music room. Not her family, not her friends, no one. It wasn't because she wanted to hide it. She just needed a little more time to understand how she felt about it. It wasn't every day that you surprised an entire room of teachers simply by pressing a piano key. Maybe it wasn't even about the piano, she thought. Maybe it was about being seen differently, about having someone look at her and realize she had something inside her that even she didn't fully understand. That moment changed something. It was like a gentle push, telling her to stop running from the things she cared about. She stayed in the park for a while, watching the light change as the sun rose higher. People started walking through the paths, some heading to work, some just passing time. She thought about her next steps. Should she go back to the music room? Should she ask for lessons? Should she try again? Part of her was scared. Scared of failing, scared of disappointing people, scared of believing in herself too much. But another part of her, the part that woke up with that strange feeling today, kept whispering that she was ready. After leaving the park, she walked back home with a new determination building in her chest. She entered her room, picked up her notebook again, and wrote down a single sentence. Today I will try. It was simple, but it was enough. She closed the notebook, placed it gently on her table, and let her hands rest on top of it for a moment. She looked around her room, scanning the small details she knew by heart. The photos taped to the wall, the books she had collected over the years, the little lamp on her bedside table that had been with her since childhood. Everything felt familiar, yet somehow she felt like a different person standing in the middle of it. She picked up her backpack and opened it, checking if she had everything she needed. She placed her pencil case inside, a small snack, her notebook, and a scarf in case the weather turned cooler later. She zipped it up and slung it over her shoulder. Before leaving the house, she paused at the doorway and took a long breath. She knew that whatever happened next, she didn't want to hide anymore. She wanted to step forward, even if it meant stumbling at first. She wanted to give herself a fair chance. The walk to school felt different this time. She walked with steady steps, feeling a quiet confidence inside her. When she reached the building, she could hear the soft hum of students chatting in the hallways. She made her way to the music room, her heart beating a little faster with every step. When she reached the door, she stopped and placed her hand gently on the handle. For a moment she hesitated, wondering if she should turn back. But she didn't. She pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty, filled with that familiar scent of polished wood and old sheet music. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft patterns on the floor. She walked toward the piano, the same one she had played the day the teachers had looked at her so differently. She sat down in front of it, letting her fingers hover above the keys. It felt almost magical, like the instrument was waiting for her. She pressed one key softly, letting the sound ring out in the quiet room. It echoed gently, wrapping around her like a warm blanket. She smiled. Then she played another note, and another. Soon her hands moved on their own, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because the music inside her needed to come out. She didn't rush. She didn't doubt herself. She simply let the sound fill the room. Somewhere in the hallway, footsteps approached. Someone paused near the door, listening quietly. She didn't notice at first, too absorbed in the moment, letting the music guide her. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. She felt like herself. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of something bigger than she had expected. The hall felt different that morning, almost as if the air carried a quiet excitement that no one could quite explain. Students moved in and out of the space, some whispering about what they planned to perform, while others practiced their lines or warmed up their voices. But the girl who had surprised everyone simply sat in a corner near the stage curtain, her hands folded on her lap as if she wanted to disappear into the shadows. She wasn't nervous in the way most people expected. She just didn't like being watched before she performed. She needed a moment, a breath, a silent space where she could gather the calm she had carried for years. She heard footsteps coming toward her. A teacher passed by, glancing at her for a second as if trying to guess what she would play. The same teacher who had smirked lightly during rehearsals now looked thoughtful. Maybe curious, maybe confused, maybe both. The girl pretended not to notice. She was used to adults underestimating her. It had been a quiet pattern in her life, something she had learned not to let bother her. As the time came closer for her performance, she stood up and walked slowly toward the stage entrance. Her steps were soft, almost soundless, but inside her, her thoughts moved like waves. She heard the muffled music of the student performing before her, a light tune played by someone who clearly practiced but didn't love the instrument the way she did. She respected their effort, but in her heart, she was ready to show something deeper. Something that came from years of sitting at an old piano in a small room, learning to tell her feelings through sound. When the student before her finished, the applause faded quickly. The teacher in charge called her name. She stepped out from behind the curtain. The moment the students saw her, a soft ripple moved through the crowd. A few whispered. Some leaned toward one another as if trying to guess whether she would impress or embarrass herself. But her pace stayed steady. Her face stayed calm. She approached the piano, a large black instrument with a soft shine that reflected the stage lights. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the silence settle around her. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't performing for attention. She was preparing for a conversation between her heart and the keys. She pulled out the bench quietly and adjusted it with care. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, fingers curved gently. The teachers sitting near the front exchanged the same grins they had shared earlier. Not cruel ones, but the kind that came from thinking they already knew what would happen. They expected a simple tune, maybe a few shaky notes. They couldn't imagine anything else. The girl didn't look at them. She didn't need their approval. Then she pressed the first note. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't soft either. It was clean, controlled, filled with a warmth that surprised everyone who heard it. The note carried something unmistakable. Experience. Not the experience of someone who had taken a few lessons. The experience of someone who understood the piano the way some people understand a close friend. A few teachers straightened in their seats. She continued, letting the next notes follow like a story unfolding. Her fingers didn't hesitate. They glided smoothly, gently, then powerfully, as the music shifted into something much richer than anyone expected. It filled the hall, echoing off the walls, wrapping every listener in a sound that felt bigger than the small school stage. Students froze. A handful of them slowly turned their heads toward the teachers, as if wanting to see their reactions. The grins were gone. Nothing but astonishment remained. Her hands moved faster now, not with panic but with confidence. The music rose and dipped, carrying emotion that she had never expressed aloud. Feelings she kept quiet at home. Feelings she hid at school. Every part of her heart flowed through the instrument as if the keys were the only place where her voice could truly live. The teachers exchanged glances, but these were not casual or amused anymore. They looked almost embarrassed for having misjudged her. The music teacher leaned forward slightly, studying her posture, her touch, her timing. It was clear now that they had underestimated someone extraordinary. As she reached the middle of the piece, the hall seemed completely transformed. The chatter that usually filled school events was gone. Even students who were known for whispering or laughing during performances sat frozen in place. There was something rare happening on that stage, something that didn't need bright lights or fancy props. It was just her hands and the piano, and somehow that was more than enough. The melody softened, drifting into a gentle passage. Her fingers danced lightly, whispering across the keys. The softness didn't make the performance weaker. It made it personal, emotional, almost fragile. But she carried it with such control that even the teachers who had been skeptical now seemed completely drawn in. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music guide her. In that small gesture, the audience saw something honest, something real. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply sharing a part of herself. When she reached the final section, her hands moved with a strength and clarity that filled the entire hall. Each note seemed to lift the air a little higher. Even those who didn't understand music could feel the emotion in it. The last chord rang out, deep and resonant, hanging in the air long after her hands lifted away. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No applause, no whispers, just silence. Then the hall erupted. Students clapped wildly. Teachers stood up, some almost too stunned to move at first. The music teacher placed a hand over their chest, as if moved in a way they hadn't expected. A few students even whistled softly, unable to hide their shock. The girl sat still for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. She didn't smile widely, just a small, gentle curve of her lips, the kind that showed she appreciated the applause but didn't need it. She stood up and bowed slightly, and as she stepped away from the piano, something shifted in the room. People didn't look at her the way they had before. The doubt was gone. The quiet assumptions were gone. In their place was respect. Real respect. The kind that comes unplanned. She walked back toward the curtain, and as she did, the teachers who had grinned earlier now watched her with awe. One even whispered to another, amazed at what they had just witnessed. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already said everything she wanted to say through her music. And deep inside her heart, she felt lighter than she ever had before. That single performance had changed everything. Not because she wanted attention, but because she had finally shown the world the part of herself she had kept hidden for so long. The hall was still buzzing even after she stepped off the stage. The sound of applause echoed in her ears, not in a loud or overwhelming way, but in a soft, almost unreal hum. She had never imagined that a simple school performance could feel like this. She had never expected people to look at her differently after just one piece of music. But here she was, standing in the narrow hallway behind the stage, trying to steady her breathing as the curtain fell back into place. She leaned lightly against the wall, letting the cool surface press against her back. It felt grounding, like a reminder that everything that had just happened was real, and not some dream she would wake from. A few students hurried past her, whispering excitedly about her performance. She didn't turn toward them, but their words drifted clearly down the hallway. They weren't mocking her anymore. They weren't doubting her. They were amazed. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and even now, she wasn't sure what to do with all the reactions around her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the rush of emotions settle. It wasn't pride that filled her chest, and it wasn't relief either. It was something different, something quieter but warmer. It was the feeling of finally being seen for who she truly was. Before she could gather herself fully, she heard footsteps approaching. Slow, steady, deliberate. When she opened her eyes, the music teacher stood a few feet away, looking at her with an expression she had never seen from them before. It wasn't their usual polite smile or the casual grin they wore when talking to students. This was something deeper, respect mixed with a kind of stunned admiration. "That was incredible," the teacher said softly, almost as if speaking too loudly would break the moment. The girl didn't know what to say. She simply nodded. The teacher stepped closer, their voice filled with sincerity. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated, not because she wanted to hide the answer, but because she wasn't used to talking about her personal life. Still, she answered quietly, "At home. I practiced every day. I've been playing since I was small." The teacher blinked, surprised. "Every day?" She gave a small nod. "It helps me understand things. Even when I didn't have the right words, the piano always made sense." The teacher smiled softly, a real smile this time, not one shaped by assumptions. "Well, it certainly made sense to everyone out there. You have a gift." A small warmth rose in her chest. She didn't play for praise, but hearing that from someone who had doubted her not long ago felt strangely comforting. The teacher took a breath, still looking amazed. "You know, sometimes as teachers we think we understand our students right away. But today you reminded all of us that there is always more to a person than what we first see. Thank you for that." She didn't know how to respond to such honest words, so she simply gave a polite bow of her head. It was enough. The teacher understood. As the teacher walked away to help prepare for the next part of the program, the girl stood still for a moment longer. She felt different somehow, not transformed, but strengthened, like something inside her had finally clicked into place. Soon, the hallway filled again with sounds, students heading back into the hall, teachers calling out instructions, performers preparing for their turns. The normal noise of school life resumed. But even with all the movement around her, she felt calm. The music she had played still lingered in her mind, steady and clear. When she returned to the main hall, she saw students pointing toward her, whispering to their friends. A few even stopped her to tell her how amazing her performance had been. She wasn't used to so much attention, but she handled it with quiet grace, thanking them softly before moving on. She took her seat near the back, where she always liked to sit. She didn't need the spotlight. She never did. But this time, when she sat down, something was different. The students around her shifted slightly, making space in a way that showed they now viewed her with quiet respect rather than indifference. As the next performers took the stage, she watched with a calm heart. She wasn't comparing herself. She wasn't waiting for more applause. She was simply appreciating the moment, grateful she had been brave enough to share her music. A little while later, the principal walked on stage to make closing announcements. They spoke in their usual steady tone, thanking everyone who participated and praising the variety of talents displayed that day. But then, Unexpectedly, they paused and glanced around the hall. There was one performance today, the principal said slowly, that reminded all of us how important it is to never judge a student by their quietness. Sometimes the most extraordinary talents remain hidden until the right moment. Whispers filled the hall. Students already knew who the principal was talking about. The principal continued, "To the student who played the piano so beautifully today, thank you. You showed us something truly special." Her cheeks warmed slightly, but she kept her gaze on the stage. She wasn't used to public acknowledgement, and even though the principal had not said her name, she felt the weight of everyone's attention turning toward her. She kept her expression calm, though inside she felt a small flutter of emotion. When the assembly ended, students gathered their bags and instruments, still talking about the event. A group of younger students approached her shyly, asking how long she had been playing and if she could teach them someday. She didn't promise anything, but she gave them a kind smile and said she would think about it. As she walked through the school corridor, she noticed something important. Not once did anyone look at her the way they had before. There were no dismissive glances, no amused smirks, no quiet judgments. People looked at her with admiration now, with curiosity, with something like wonder. But the most important change didn't come from the students or the teachers. It came from within her. She felt a quiet confidence rising inside her, the kind she had never allowed herself to feel before. She had always been quiet, always stayed in the background, always assumed others wouldn't understand her. But now she realized that sometimes people needed to see something before they could appreciate it. And sometimes it took one brave moment to show them. When she reached the school gate, she paused for a moment and looked back at the building. Sunlight reflected off the windows, making them glow softly. She thought about all the times she had walked through those halls unnoticed. Today had been different. Today she had shown them her voice, without speaking a single word. She stepped outside, feeling the fresh air brush across her face. The world felt a little bigger now, not because the school had changed, but because she had. As she walked home, she didn't rush. She let the memories of the day settle calmly inside her. The applause, the silence after her final note, the expressions on the teachers' faces, the respect in the music teacher's eyes, the way the hall had felt when she played. She knew this was only the beginning. Music had always been her private world, but now she understood that it could also be her path, something she could continue to grow with, something that would carry her into the future if she let it. And as she reached her doorstep, she gently pressed her palm against the small wooden keys of the invisible piano she imagined in her mind, the one she had played since she was little. She smiled softly. She didn't need a spotlight. She didn't need recognition. She just needed her music. And after today, the world finally knew what her heart had been saying all along.